Welcome back. All right, I want to talk about the Detroit Red Wings today. Yep, we're into March, and the month of March has not been kind to the Detroit Red Wings. I had hoped when I debuted this magnet on this board, this wonderful octopus magnet, and I'm pretty sure I haven't had this on the board before, that it'd be happier times for the Detroit Red Wings, say, playoffs. And I'd love to see the Detroit Red Wings make the playoffs for the first time since 2016. But it really is increasingly looking like that's not going to happen. They're currently 4 points back of the number 2 wildcard team in the East, which is Columbus, and they've played one more game than Columbus. And Columbus is tied into this losing streak as well. So the losing streak starts with a game at home against Columbus that they lost 5-2. Now, they scored first in that game. Compher a goal and an assist, and Talbot 25 saves on 29 shots. And we'll talk about the goaltending as well when we get over to this part of the board. But everything's just kind of fallen apart. And then there's the stadium game. Now, Detroit fans were angry. I think the Red Wings were angry, too, at a missed call they felt in that game. But that game, they lose against Columbus 5-3 in front of 90,000 plus. They did trail first in that game. Patrick Kane, a goal and 2 assists. And Talbot, 16 saves on 20 shots. So back-to-back starts for Talbot where the stats aren't fantastic. Then they came home and they lost against Carolina 2-1. Now, they trailed first. Soderblom would score in the third period to make the game close. Alex Lyon had a good game, 28 saves on 30 shots. One of the better stat lines for a goaltender on the board. In fact, probably the best stat line for a goaltender on the board. Depending on shot quality, you can always get into shot quality as well as save percentage. Maybe Talbot faced more difficult shots last night than did Lyon against Carolina. But either way, Lyon with a pretty good stat line. So they use him again for the next game at home against Utah, which they lost 4-2. They trailed first in that game too. So that's 3 games in a row where they allowed the first goal. Larkin had a goal in that game and played 24 minutes and 53 seconds. I've seen people questioning Dylan Larkin, and I get it. One statement that I've made on Dylan Larkin, and I still feel this way, is that when the Detroit Red Wings are ready to contend, Larkin's probably the second line center. And I say that because he's a very good player. There are some excellent second line centers in the NHL. It's not meant as an insult. I just don't know if I see him in that same stratosphere as, like, I did the video on Nathan MacKinnon today. I don't see him as being in that same stratosphere as like a Nathan MacKinnon. Most top teams have that really big, go-to guy, unless you have a number of go-to guys and you play a really good team game, which Detroit was doing at one point this season, but it's kind of fallen off the rails. So after the loss at home against Utah, they went to Washington. They lost that game 5-2. Now, they led 2-0 in the first, and I was honestly kind of proud of them in that first period. I was like, look at this. Detroit, they've lost 4 in a row. They're coming into Washington. They're jumping on a Washington team that was starting to have some troubles at home. But they led 2-0, and then it got away from them. Raymond had 2 assists in that game. Talbot saved 23 out of 28. Washington would come back. And one of the troubling things with Detroit is when a team is coming back, they just seem to lose that focus. They don't seem to have that same amount of energy. And that ability to come back and tie a game just doesn't seem to be there as much as it might be for another team. And then there's last night's game where they played great. They did. But they still lost against a team they couldn't afford to lose to, especially in regulation, where they lose 2-1 against the Ottawa Senators. They trailed first. Larkin had the only goal for them last night. Talbot saved 21 out of 23. So there's 2 starts out of 6 where the goaltenders had a save percentage above 900, which is part of what's gone on here. So how much worse can this get? It could get worse. So tomorrow night they're at home against Buffalo. Buffalo showed against Edmonton last night that they're ready to play spoiler, right? For right or for whatever, however you may feel about that as a Sabres fan that's like, well, we could always use another number 1 draft pick. They win a bunch of games between now and the end of the season and don't have a shot at a top draft pick. I don't know how Buffalo fans are going to feel. But would I be entirely surprised if they came in and beat Detroit tomorrow? Not with the way they've been playing. And just the losses and the various ways they've been losing games. Again, last night the game was stolen from them by Ulmar. Then they're in Carolina on Friday. And Carolina, we know how stingy Carolina is defensively and the systems that Carolina plays and how that is very difficult to overcome for a visiting team. Then they come back home and they play against Vegas on Sunday. That's not easy. Vegas does have a rough record against the East. Vegas is better at home than on the road. Maybe that's an opening for them on the Sunday, but it's not going to be easy. And then next week on Tuesday, so a week from tonight, a week from when I'm recording this, they're in Washington again. So they had the 2-0 lead against Washington. They couldn't hold it. They need to play a full 60 minutes. It's a cliche for a reason. It's because teams need to play that full 60 minutes. If you take your foot off the gas, there are teams in this league that can burn you without having played necessarily a great game. Washington's one of them, where they can have just a really good 10-minute period of a game, and because they've kept everything close, they win. Vegas is another one that has done that in the past, and they have Vegas again on Saturday the 22nd. So between the game in Washington and the game in Las Vegas, they have a few days off, but that's 2 games against Vegas out of 3, and that's not going to be easy. Winning at home and then going to the Fortress and trying to win there, and in between having a game in Washington. Then they're in Utah on Monday the 24th. The next night, they're in Denver against the Avalanche on the 25th. That is a tough road trip right there. It's a 4-game road trip, but look at that. Washington, Vegas, Utah, and Colorado. So if you're a Wings fan and you're kind of down, I mean, this road trip could make it worse. Or they go through that road trip, if they win 3 out of 4, could completely change their playoff odds, right? They have been a very hot and cold team throughout the season. Lalonde and McClellan both. They've had their hot streaks and their cold streaks. Then they come back home, and before the end of the month, they play against Ottawa on Thursday the 27th. And then on Saturday the 29th, they're at home against Boston. So it is not an easy schedule. The only teams that are outside of a playoff position who they face over this time, Buffalo tomorrow, Utah, who are not playing like a team that's outside of a playoff position, and then Boston, a team that, well, they've sold off, and so the pressure's off for them. They're not expected to make it to a playoff spot anyway, so they can play a little more loosey-goosey of sorts, like just a little more relaxed is a nice way of putting it. This is not an easy run from here, and this is by the end of March. This is a lot of games, and so for Detroit, they're going to have to figure out how to win on the road, because they have 5 out of 6 here that are on the road after the home game against Buffalo tomorrow. And they're going to have to get things straightened out offensively. Look at their scoring leaders from February 12th until now. So for the last month, Kane, 9 games, 3 goals, 6 assists, 9 points. Patrick Kane is a legend. He's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. Probably shouldn't be leading the team in scoring over the last month. And I don't say that to belittle him, just because there's so many good young players on this team. I'm kind of surprised that he's at the top. But DeBrincat, 9 games, 5 goals, 2 assists, 7 points. DeBrincat's plus-minus stands out as a -7, so the 5-on-5 play is hurting them. Detroit, 5-on-5, not getting the goals they need to. Raymond, 9 games, 1 goal, 6 assists, 7 points for him. Larkin, 9 games, 4 goals, 2 assists, 6 points. You might want a little more out of Larkin, but 4 goals in 9 games isn't bad. Compher, 9 games, 1 goal, 3 assists, 4 points, and Compher's a -6. Then there's a couple others I wanted to call attention to. Tarasenko is at this point, he's older, and he's not going to be a 40-goal scorer for the rest of his career. He's more of a complimentary forward. 9 games over the last month, 1 goal, 2 assists, 3 points. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about Marco Kasper. I've been impressed with Kasper's game, even though the finish just hasn't been there at this point. 9 games, 1 goal, 2 assists, 3 points for Kasper as well. I think he's playing well, and I hope that he gets all the opportunities to break through, and maybe he ends up scoring some of the goals they need in this upcoming schedule, because they need somebody to break through and get those goals. You can't just be relying on Kane, DeBrincat, and Larkin for all your goals going forward, and that's kind of what they've been doing over the last month. Not having depth in the NHL means you're probably not going to have playoffs for your franchise either. Talbot over the last month, 1-4-1 with an .871 save percentage. Needs to be better, but for Lyon, he's 1-2 with an .870 save percentage. Before the season, I said Talbot will give you the goaltending during the regular season to get you to the playoffs. In the playoffs, bit of a checkered past there, a bit of a checkered record, but it just hasn't been there the last month for Talbot either. And so they're not goalieing other teams. They got goalied by the Ottawa Senators. They got goalied as well in the game against Carolina, at least on some level, because they only scored the once. And this is a problem. This is a team that was scoring a lot early in the season. Their power play was fantastic. But over the last month, from February 12th until now, 2.44 goals scored per game. The attack just isn't working. And Todd McClellan, I'm sure, is trying to find the exact right line combination that's going to get things going. But this is where a lot of the focus is going to go to Steve Yzerman. What has Yzerman done to improve the roster? And the results so far, not all that encouraging if you're a Detroit fan. Goals against per game, far too high. 3.67 goals against per game over the last month. So they're allowing 1.23 more goals against per game than they're scoring, and that's a recipe for disaster. That tells you this team's 2-6-1 over the last month, and they've gone from a team that looks like they should be in the playoffs, and honestly, I'm really surprised that they've backed out the way they have. This is a team that was tied for a playoff spot last year and only missed out because they didn't have as many regulation wins as did the Washington Capitals. I felt they were a better team than the Capitals last season, just didn't get that tiebreaker. And now this year they've fallen back. The one that this reminds me of, the one team this reminds me of is Buffalo. Buffalo in 2022-2023, they missed the playoffs by 1 point. Just about get there. And so I had some optimism going to the following season. You know what? Buffalo should be able to do this. And they didn't. And I'm feeling that same way now with Detroit, that I felt like the optimism was there, that Detroit should be able to get in for the first time since 2016, and it's just not working. Now, whether this ends up reflecting more on Yzerman or more on McLellan, I can't see how it would be on the coach, right? They've already fired the coach. So does management above Yzerman look at things and go, we need to make a change? Will there be big changes this summer if this team doesn't make it? You would think they have cap space to make changes. Now, shots per game over that same time period, they're getting 32.4 shots per game. They're allowing 26.9 shots against per game. Now, last night they had 49 shots. So that's probably going to cause this to be a little bit more lopsided than it otherwise should be. But it still shows this team's generating opportunities, and they're not allowing a ton of shots against. They're not able to get the results. And without the results, it doesn't matter. So I can stand here till I'm blue in the face and talk about how, these guys probably should have been the team that made the playoffs last year. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter any more than it does saying that about Buffalo or about years Arizona could have made it and just fell short. If you don't make it, you don't make it. The Florida Panthers right now are a juggernaut. I can remember seasons where Florida would back out late in the season or they just barely missed the playoffs. And you'd watch and go, this team's close. They're not far away. But they just couldn't get over the hump. And Detroit is starting to resemble that. So in those 9 games that they've played over the last month, they have 12 goals, 5-on-5. They are averaging about 1 goal per game, 5-on-5. Doesn't cut it. It's not going to get it done. They've got seven goals, 5-on-4, so with power play, and 1 goal, 5-on-3. So the power play has chipped in almost as many goals as regulation. You can call that a power play merchant team if you want. I more lean towards this is a team that's struggling 5-on-5. Their power play clicking at a 29.6% rate, and the penalty kill has been a problem, 68.4%. They haven't had a shorthanded goal over the last month either. Their points percentage over the last month is a woeful 278. To put that into perspective, the lowest points percentage in the National Hockey League right now is 300, and that's San Jose with the 300 points percentage. Yeah, Detroit's in trouble. And I don't know exactly how they're going to get themselves out of this, but they have very little time to figure this out. We are not too far from the playoffs. We're a little over a month away from the playoffs, and the Detroit Red Wings have pulled themselves pretty remarkably out of contention, and they're going to need to go on quite the run through these games coming up, so we'll see. Let me know your thoughts on the Detroit Red Wings. How do you fix this? If this team misses the playoffs again, what needs to be fixed? What needs to be done? Is it goaltending? Is it defense? Is it just the young guys need to mature a little bit and that'll fix it? Let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.